Hi guys. In this video, I'm going to show you how to completely install and set up the all-new Raspberry Pi OS on your Raspberry Pi 4, Raspberry Pi 2, or Raspberry 3. Before we get started, you'll need a Raspberry Pi. The 1 to 4 or 8 GB model will work. Also, you're gonna need a USB Type-C power supply. We recommend the official Raspberry Pi power supply. A micro SD card, 32 GB or 64 GB. And finally you'll need a Windows 10 PC to flash the Raspberry Pi OS to your SD card for your Pi4. First things first, visit the Raspberry Pi downloads page to download the Raspberry Pi Imager. Using the Raspberry Pi Imager is the easiest way to install Raspberry Pi OS on your SD card. We're gonna go with the Windows version. When the download finishes, click it to launch the installer. Then install Raspberry Pi Imager on your computer. From your Start menu, type Raspberry Pi Imager and select this app. To use SO operating system, we're gonna choose our OS, and from here we have a few options, but we're going to be going with the Raspberry Pi OS. As I'm making this video, they only offer the 32-bit version of Raspberry Pi OS and the installer. This will change down the road once the 64-bit version comes out of beta. But we can still manually download the 64-bit version and install it to our SD card for Raspberry Pi 4. Link for this is in the description. This is the post over on the Raspberry Pi forum for the new Raspberry Pi OS 64-bit edition. It's in beta as making this video, but like I mentioned, it will be added to the installer soon. And I'm actually going to go ahead and download the 64-bit version. Download here. It's 1 GB. Now if you just want to strictly stick to the Raspberry Pi Imager, we can install the 32-bit version right here. As I'm making this video really easy to do, we have Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit. This is the recommended version. If we go down to Raspberry Pi OS Other, we have the Lite version, which does not contain a desktop. You can install one later on if you'd like to, but it will boot directly to the terminal, so people who are looking for a desktop experience won't be using this much. And we also have Raspberry Pi OS Full. This is a much larger image and there's lots of great applications pre-installed. And if you're just starting out, I would actually recommend using this version. Here it's a much larger download, but there's already a lot of great applications pre-installed. And some of you might want to use this. We'll go back. Here we have other general purpose operating system. Ubuntu. Now this only offers the server version. You can install a desktop on this just like I mentioned with the Raspberry Pi OS Lite version. We've got videos on that. Kodi is Media Center software which runs on Raspberry Pi. Next, go to Emulation and Game OS section. Retropie is the best known emulation suite for the Raspberry Pi. We also have utility images. You really don't need to mess with this unless somebody tells you you need to reflash or EEPROM. Erase will erase your SD card. And we have Use Custom, so if you did go ahead and download that 64 version of Raspberry Pi OS, you can use this here. It's going to open up a window. You'll need to navigate to where you have it downloaded. If I click on this, it's going to load that operating system up and get it ready to flash to our SD card. This is the 64-bit version. But for most people out there, they might just want to stick with the recommended software Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit. So now that you have your chosen version of Raspberry Pi OS loaded up in the operating system panel here, we're gonna choose our SD card. We'll just click on Choose SD. This is my 32 GB SD card. I'm using a cheap USB micro SD card reader. Now if you've chosen a preloaded operating system, it will automatically download it and flash it to the SD card. Since I'm going with the 64-bit version that I've already downloaded from the forum, it's already on my PC. So it's just gonna start writing to the SD card. Give this some time. To finish up, it really depends on how fast your SD card is, your reader and your USB port. Alright, so the flash is now finished. All we need to do is pull the SD card from our PC or laptop.